I'm Tom Hood, CEO of the Business Learning Institute, an affiliate of the Maryland Association of CPAs. And this session is about getting ready for the fast future, the anticipatory CPA. And I guess it gets to this idea that we're now entering a transformational time. This is Klaus Schwab from the World Economic Forum at Davos, and there's a book by the same title. But he really talks about this idea that we're now in this exponential digital revolutionary times that will, as he would say, fundamentally alter the way we live, work, relate to one another. And it's actually going to be one of the biggest transformations that we've ever experienced as humans. I don't know if you agree with that, but every time I talk about it, most finance and accounting professionals nod their heads and say, unfortunately, yeah, I would say we're in that kind of period of time. And this is just an example of that. I was at a accounting tech show, Sage Accounting Software, and got to meet Pepper, the robot that actually had an iPad around her neck that had a chat bot connected to Alexa and the actual Sage accounting system. And that's here today. You can actually give voice commands and listen to your system, give you responses like how much cash do I have in the bank? How many people owe me money? What are my to-do list items for next week? So I like to say the future's here, it's just unevenly distributed. So what's the number one reason organizations fail? Now, I know a lot of people say cash flow, some say they're not planning properly, they're missing trends, and most of that, all of that actually is right. But I think the number one reason comes from a futurist named Andrew Zolli, and he said, the issue is that they miss the weak signals of disruptive change. So the weak signals of disruptive change. Now, how many of you have been on an airplane and the pilot comes on board and says, buckle up, we're going to be hitting turbulence. So he knows it's coming and you get ready for that bumpy ride. Now, how many of you have been on a plane when the pilot didn't say that and all of a sudden you started bumping and then the pilot comes on and says, everybody, take your seats and buckle up. That phenomena is something called clear air turbulence. And those are, despite all the radar, sophisticated technology in the plane and at the ground towers, they couldn't see that turbulence. And that's what they mean by these weak signals of disruptive change. And I think the changes that we're seeing driven by technology are for the most part invisible, just like the clear air turbulence, right? And so when you start to look at what's happening, I think in the last year or so, over 9 retailers have gone out of business just like that. And you can count all the other disruptions, right? Taxis and Airbnb, taxis and Uber and Airbnb and the hotel industry and you name it. Again, most of those, you could argue that those folks didn't see it coming, either because they were too busy or the fact that it was, for the most part, invisible. So we've actually worked with a futurist, a guy named Daniel Burrus. He's a best-selling author of, New York Times best-selling author of Flash Foresight. And what's interesting about what he talks about is, if you look at the title, it's how to see the invisible and do the impossible. And so he's actually created a methodology to identify these invisible trends ahead of time and to begin to think about what you can do in anticipation of those trends so that, in fact, you drive disruption and change, not having it impacted on you. So I want to relate this to the finance and accounting profession. And I'll start with the CPA in public accounting. And here, the number one challenge that we see over and over again, and this report's a few years old, but it's the same. I've seen more studies that actually correlate to this. But effectively, the number one reason that clients leave their CPA, and I would say you can relate this in the corporate and government sides and not-for-profits, is that they didn't get proactive advice, only reactive service. Now, I'll give you an example. When I was a CFO in highway construction, we were getting disrupted in our industry, severe downturn. And during that, we were losing money. We had to worry about our bank and bonding company keeping our lines of credit open. And I'll never forget, we were in the midst of that heavy year of losses. And the auditor was in doing the audit. And so I was in a meeting and they were going over the financials with me, the audited financials. And we were looking at the footnotes. Now, in the midst of that meeting, the auditor's kind of going over the footnotes. Now, remember, as a CFO, CPA, I had prepared those, so I knew the numbers, just they put it in the statutory language. Door knocks, come in, it's my controller. Controller says, Tom, we need like $500,000 to make payroll by Friday. This is like a Wednesday. So needless to say, it's a pretty big issue. The auditor, though, didn't pick his head up. And so I told the controller, I said, look, let's meet right after I'm done this, we'll get together. And so he left, and the auditor didn't really stop in their tracks. They kept going through the audited financials. Like, they didn't stop and say, wow, what's going on? I mean, they obviously knew what the financials said, but they didn't say, could we help you? Is there anything that's, how bad is this? What could we do to help you figure this stuff out? And sure enough, he left, the auditor left. We fixed the cash flow item. And the next week, we actually called in another CPA firm to talk about projections, helping us with our bank and bonding company, looking at future-oriented projections. And when I sat down with the auditor in charge of the audit, who I had known for about 10 years, they had been the auditor of record for about 20, I said, we're going to look for a new firm to help us do the projection side. We're going to keep the audit and tax with you guys because we trust you and you've done a great job. And the partner looked at me and said, how come you didn't consider us? And I said, well, what do you mean, why we wouldn't consider you? He's like, yeah, we do those things. I said, well, in the midst of all the things that we've talked about, and for the last 10 years, quite frankly, you haven't really sat down and talked about anything that was future focused or proactive. You didn't talk about anything related to the future. Everything was about what we just did. And while you do that well, that isn't what I need right now. And so I think the point there is that's what we mean by this idea of proactive service versus reactive services. And so I think that the point of this is we just did a survey with all of our business and industry members, several hundred CFOs, controllers, and 2/3 of them said that they were feeling moderate to severe disruption. 2/3. So I think there's a lesson there for all of us, right? Is that if we're feeling disruption, that means we didn't anticipate it. And what can we start doing to try to get ahead of these kinds of trends? Now here's what I think the next challenge that relates to this is. So this is why we're trapped in the past. And this gets to the top challenges so this is research with about 1,000 CPAs and finance accounting professionals all across the United States. In fact, some in Canada. And if you look at these top 6 things, right, there's the normal talent things that are there, finding top talent and retaining them, succession planning, which is related to that. But look at the other ones though, information overload, doing more with less, changing systems, that's a little different, not enough time, and being reactive versus proactive. So, 4 out of those relate to time. And they relate to this idea that we're really, really busy. And I think that's the risk because we're in a period of faster and faster change. And the busier we are, the less likely we are to see the change or be able to position how we might react to that change. So I think that's kind of the thing that we have to put in perspective here. And that's what we're hoping to help you see a little bit differently after this.